Anti-popes often challenged the legitimacy and authority of the pope. They refused to follow the popes who were elected by the church, but sometimes for good reason. Throughout history, there have been several popes that were just downright evil, so today we're going to dive into the lives of some anti-popes as well as some evil popes, starting with Hippolytus. And no, he has nothing to do with hippos. Benedict IX. Benedict IX is like a character straight out of a medieval drama. He was born into a noble family in Rome, and he went on to serve not one, not two, but 3 terms as pope between the years 1032 and 1048 AD. This guy was into some pretty weird stuff, including bestiality, but we'll get more into that later on. During his stint as the Bishop of Rome, Benedict IX didn't just sit around blessing folks. Nope, he brought some serious party vibes to the papal scene, shaking things up like never before. His wild antics put an end to the old boys club run by the Counts of Tusculum and their noble cronies. And let me tell you, the scandals from his time in office were juicy enough to make even the most seasoned gossips blush. But amidst all the chaos, some good came out of it. The uproar caused by Benedict's shenanigans forced the powers to tighten security around papal elections. They locked down the Pope election process, making sure that no one could pull any funny business when it came to picking the next one. They also slapped some age restrictions on the cardinals, ensuring that the pool of potential popes wasn't just a playground for powerful families anymore. These changes brought some much-needed stability to the church, putting an end to the blatant favoritism and backroom deals that had plagued it for so long. Finally, the papacy could breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that the future of one of the world's most influential religious institutions wasn't being decided by a bunch of power-hungry nobles. And that's what I call a papal makeover. Now let's dive into the wild world of Benedict IX's early days as the Supreme Pontiff. Picture a kid somewhere between 11 and 20 getting handed the keys to the papal throne by his influential dad. That kid was Benedict IX. Not long after taking office, he got booted out of Rome 2 times by an anti-pope who claimed that they were the real deal. But he always found his way back to the papal seat. Benedict's reign is a whirlwind of scandal and controversy. We're talking murder, mayhem, and even rumors of some seriously wild parties at the Lateran Palace. These lewd parties involved not just women and men, but animals too. I told you he was into bestiality. Benedict first decided to call it quits in 1044, but despite stepping down, he still managed to stir up trouble, earning himself a reputation as a priest in disguise. A real-life demon from hell, according to some folks. He then became pope once again in 1045, when he was in his 30s. But this reign lasted less than 2 months. And why do you think that was? Well, it turns out that his antics landed him in hot water, so he decided to do the unthinkable. He committed simony, selling the papacy to the highest bidder, Gregory VI. The reasons for this sale are a bit murky. Some say it was to fund his wedding. Others think he just wanted a cushy retirement plan. But Gregory claims that he bought the papacy to save the church from all the scandal and sin that Benedict stirred up. But hold on to your holy water, because this story is about to take another twist. Gregory was dismissed from the papal throne by King Henry III of Germany when Benedict changed his mind about marriage after he couldn't snag his dream bride. His plans for retirement were dashed, so he clawed himself back into power in 1047. Again, he served as pope for less than a year before being removed from the throne for the final time. Benedict was then excommunicated in 1048. It's not exactly clear how he lived out the rest of his days. Some accounts claim that he moved to southeast Rome, where he repented of his sins and died in January of 1056. But others suggest that he carried on with his wicked ways. Whatever the truth may be, it's said that he never lost hope of regaining the papacy. Apparently, being pope 3 times wasn't enough for Benedict. Hippolytus. If you think the church today is scandalous, you're in for a wild ride for today's video. Back in the days of the early Christian church, they had scandals, power struggles, and even a bit of rebellious drama that would make today's soap operas look tame. And kicking it all off was Hippolytus, the man who's considered by many to be the very first anti-pope. In the formative years of Christianity, the Roman Empire flexed its muscles, and Christians really got the short end of the stick for about 250 years. And when I say that, I mean they were being persecuted left and right. They were burned alive and were thrown into the dens of hungry lions. Any horrible punishment you can think of likely happened to Christians. Believing in Jesus Christ back then was no walk in the park. They didn't have the same kind of religious freedom that we do today. This persecution began under the mad Emperor Nero in 64 AD and ended under the rule of Constantine the Great in 313 AD. During that time within the church, things weren't any less chaotic. Theological debates raged. Nobody could agree on what would happen to the faithful who had committed serious sins. So naturally, two groups formed: those who supported leniency for those who had fallen, and those who pushed for severe penalties or even advocated for the permanent exclusion of the fallen, known as rigorists. Rigorists were all about tough love. In their eyes, if you messed up, you couldn't be saved and were kicked out of the church, no questions asked. But on the other side were those who believed in mercy. They believed in forgiveness and second chances. It was like a theological tug of war. And that's where Hippolytus comes in. Hippolytus overflowed with religious knowledge. Or in other words, he was a real brainiac. He's considered to be a church father, an influential Christian theologian and writer who established the doctrinal and intellectual foundations of Christianity. But what does that really mean? Well, he wrote treatises against several heresies afflicting the church in the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries. A treatise is a detailed and systematic written work that explores a specific topic or issue in depth. Hippolytus wrote treatises that analyzed and refuted various heresies, false teachings or beliefs that were troubling the early Christian church. Many of these false beliefs were about understanding who Jesus really was, whether he was fully God and fully human. Early Christians had a hard time agreeing on the right words to explain it all. Hippolytus was trying to keep the church on the straight and narrow, but he had a bone to pick with the men in charge, particularly the Pope. Hippolytus was not one to cut words. He had beef with Pope Zephyrinus for not cracking down on heretics called modalists, who didn't believe in the Holy Trinity. Instead of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, modalists believed they were all just one divine person. To them, Jesus Christ was this divine person, but he appeared on earth as the Son. In essence, they believed that God was some kind of shapeshifter. Zephyrinus became the Pope in 198 AD. Hippolytus wanted him to do his job and condemn the modalists, but Zephyrinus was more interested in playing nice. He failed to address the issue plaguing the church, and it continued into the reign of Callistus I, who succeeded Zephyrinus in 217 AD. Hippolytus hated Callistus with a burning passion. He felt that Callistus wasn't worthy of the office due to his troubled past. When he was young and working as a slave, some people thought Callistus stole his master's money. Later, he got a bunch of people to support him, and they were the ones who elected him pope. Basically, Hippolytus and many others believed that Callistus had bribed his way to the top. Man, politics back then were just as cutthroat as they are today. This whole debacle introduced the idea of an anti-pope, which caused problems in church history, especially during the Great Western Schism in the 14th century. Hippolytus refused to bow down to the will of Callistus. He separated from the church and declared himself to be the true pope. And that's how he became the first ever anti-pope. He led his own faction of the Christian church for 19 years. He was a rigorist and didn't believe that serious sinners should be forgiven. He rejected Callistus's more merciful approach to sin. But Hippolytus would soon have reason to change his mind and think again about staying separate from the rest of the church. In 235 AD, Maximinus Thrax, a career soldier, rose to the position of emperor. And much like the early emperors of Rome, he hated the Christians, so much so that he began rounding them all up, including anti-pope Hippolytus and the newly elected pope, Saint Pontian. They were both arrested and were sent to the island of Sardinia to work in the mines. During this time, Hippolytus renounced his split from the church and accepted that he was not the true pope. And because Saint Pontian believed in repentance and forgiveness, Hippolytus was welcomed back into the church. But unfortunately, this story doesn't have a fairy tale ending. Both Hippolytus and Pontian met their end in those harsh mines. But hey, at least they kinda went out as martyrs, right? I wanted to give a big shout out to Scott Hume and Dave Sky. Thanks so much for watching and supporting OE. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. Alexander VI. As the most notorious pope in all of history, Alexander VI's reign was marked by ruthlessness, greed, nepotism, murder, and excessive indulgence in sensual pleasures. He took the papal throne in August 11, 1492 AD, at 60 years old, and held the position until his death in 1503. Alexander straight up wasn't a good guy. He was born into an Italian crime family, the Borgias, in 1431 AD. You can think of them as the very first mobsters. Alexander's true name was Rodrigo Borgia. He began his career in the church at an early age. By 14, he was appointed sacristan, an officer tasked with caring for the church and its contents at the Cathedral of Valencia. The only reason he got the job was because of his uncle, Alfonso Borgia, a cardinal who was appointed to the position by Pope Eugene IV. But you have to remember that Alexander was just a teenager at this point. And what teenager do you know that is responsible at 14? Alexander's uncle convinced the current Pope, Nicholas V, to allow Alexander to perform his role in absentia. This basically means that he never showed up for his job, but still got paid. This income allowed him to get an education in Rome. He even graduated as a doctor of law after completing rigorous studies in legal theory and other related subjects. As a young man, Alexander was described as tall and handsome, but apparently once he became pope, he lost his physical charm. He first became a cardinal in 1456 at 25 years old. The following year, he rose to be vice-chancellor of the Holy See. In that position, he grew to be extremely wealthy, and he used that wealth to fuel his promiscuous lifestyle, which didn't end when he became pope. Throughout his time in the church, he fathered at least 7 children, which is a big no-no. Did you know that the pope is supposed to be celibate? But I guess Alexander felt that he was above the rules. After all, his family never followed the rules. He took the papal seat following the death of Pope Innocent VIII. He was only elected pope because 17 of the 21 cardinals who voted on a new pope were bribed by the Borgias. So not only was Alexander corrupt, but almost everyone in the papacy was too. Alexander was a huge hypocrite. After becoming pope, he reformed the Curia, the central administrative body of the Catholic Church, and forbade simony. But what's simony? Well, it's when someone buys a religious position, usually through bribes, which is exactly how Alexander had purchased the papacy. Do you see the hypocrisy here? After making those changes, Alexander decided to focus less on leading the church and more on his primary interests. You know, like the pursuit of women and the acquisition of gold. Things the Pope really shouldn't be invested in. He also dipped his toes into the waters of nepotism, naming his son Caesar a cardinal when he was just 18 years old, and he didn't stop there. He solidified alliances by arranging marriages for his children, even arranging 3 different weddings for his daughter, Lucretia. The first marriage was annulled and Lucretia was made a widow when her second husband died under mysterious circumstances. But some believe it was her brother Caesar who killed the man, likely by orders of their father. And when Alexander traveled around Rome doing God knows what, Lucretia was often left in charge of the papacy. In 1493, Alexander tried to divide the New World into areas controlled by Spain and Portugal. But he had to change his plan in 1494 because it unfairly favored Spain. Alexander is also known for punishing and killing the famous preacher Savonarola in 1498. Savonarola had dared to speak out against corruption in the church and had called for Alexander to step down. By 1500, Alexander's behavior became even more outrageous. Murder became commonplace for the Pope, and he allowed Caesar to take part in his wicked deeds. They began to kill anyone who stood against them, but karma soon caught up with them. Shortly after celebrating the 11th anniversary of becoming Pope in August 1503, Alexander fell sick. His son Caesar also became ill around the same time. A rumor began to spread in Rome. It was said that Alexander and Caesar had dinner with Cardinal Adriano Castellesi at his villa. There had been suspicions that the Borgias planned to harm Castellesi. Castellesi believed he had been poisoned, but managed to save himself by switching the cup Caesar had prepared for him. Both Alexander and Caesar drank from it unknowingly. Caesar recovered quickly, but Alexander stayed sick for a few more days and then died at the age of 77. I wanted to give a big thank you to Laura Lynn Ann and Brett Venice 2822 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Constantine II. Constantine II didn't become pope through bribes or elections like some of the others from today's list. Nope, he became pope through sheer force. His brother marched an army directly into the heart of the papacy and declared his brother the supreme pontiff. Constantine II is referred to by some as an anti-pope, and for good reason. Technically, he held the position of pope, but not because anybody wanted him to be the pope. He was born into a noble Roman family in the city of Nepi. He had 4 siblings, the most prominent of whom was named Toto. Toto, who served as the papal governor and named himself the Duke of Nepi, decided that it was his time to shine when he caught wind of Pope Paul I's impending demise. He planned to put his own favorite person in the Pope's chair, his brother Constantine II. However, officials within the church caught wind of his plan and made him promise to stick to the traditional way of picking popes. But Toto had his fingers crossed behind his back because he didn't give up his scheme. On June 28, 767 AD, he went to his fancy house in Nepi. With the help of Constantine and his other brothers, he gathered his troops, and they didn't get just any old soldiers. They formed a whole army from their area and even convinced some country folks to join in. While Pope Paul was at death's door, Toto and his armed forces marched through the gate of St. Pancratius and headed straight for the Basilica of the Apostles. This was where members of the papal court and other Roman nobility had gathered to elect the new pope. As soon as the meeting was over, Toto and his army elected Constantine as the true supreme pontiff. At this point, though, Constantine didn't hold any position within the church, which was a problem. Accompanied by a group of armed men, Constantine was escorted to the Lateran Palace, the main papal residence. There, they tried to force the Bishop of Praeneste to ordain him as a monk. The bishop tried to get Constantine to change his mind, but Constantine and his supporters had already made their decision, and they were sticking to it. So, hesitantly, the bishop performed the ceremony, likely under the threat of death, making Constantine a proper monk. The next day, June 29th, Constantine was elevated to deacon. At this point, the Bishop of Praeneste was under the command of Constantine, against his will, and on July 5th, 767 AD, he was forced to make him the Bishop of Rome. The Roman people took an oath of fidelity to Constantine, whether they liked it or not. But in the meantime, Christophorus, the man in charge of record-keeping in ancient Rome, led a group opposed to the anti-pope. However, they had to flee to St. Peter's Basilica because their lives were now in danger, where they remained until April 768 AD. Constantine's first act as pope was to give notice to Pepin the Short, the king of the Franks, in order to secure the king's approval of his actions. In a letter, he informed Pepin that he had risen to the papal throne by the people of Rome and the cities adjoining it. He also wrote that he hoped the friendship between the papacy and Pepin could continue even though he was now pope against the king's wishes. He likely thought that he and the king would be buddies, but that's not how things went. Pepin didn't even bother to respond to Constantine's letter. So Constantine wrote another one. He said that the only reason he took on the burden of the office was because of the demands of the Roman people. He really tried to make it seem like everyone wanted him on the throne and that he reluctantly took the position. He practically begged King Pepin to bestow his friendship and to ignore any slanderous accusations regarding himself or his election. But again, Pepin refused to reply. This was likely a hit to Constantine's overly inflated ego. But he got a big head again when he received a letter from all the Eastern patriarchs, except the Patriarch of Constantinople. The message was sent by the Patriarch of Jerusalem, and it was endorsed by the Patriarch of Antioch, and Cosmas, and Patriarch of Alexandria, and a large group of the Eastern metropolitan bishops. In the letter, they accepted and endorsed Constantine as the true pope. So Constantine forwarded the message to King Pepin and read the letter out loud before the Roman people. Constantine was likely on a high after this, but Christophorus and his son Sergius didn't let him enjoy it for too long. They cooked up a sneaky plan to take back the throne. They asked Constantine if they could leave the city and become monks, but instead they teamed up with a Lombard king to storm Rome and take down the anti-pope. With a bunch of troops, including a Lombard priest, they returned to the city, attempting to break in on April 10, 768 AD. However, things got messy when Toto tried to stop them. In the chaos, Toto was killed and Constantine was warned to flee before he met the same fate. Constantine tried to hide in a church, but the Roman army found him and threw him in prison. While he was behind bars, a new pope was elected, Stephen III, and his followers began attacking key members of Constantine's administration, many of whom were blinded or killed. In April of 769 AD, there were still many who supported Constantine, so Stephen III took matters into his own hands. He publicly degraded the anti-pope and cut the papal shoes off his feet. After that, Constantine was blinded, and when he refused to confess to the charges brought against him, he had his tongue ripped out and he was beaten. He was then excommunicated from the church, and all of his acts and rulings from his time as pope were burnt before the Roman people. Constantine was banished to a monastery for the rest of his days, and no additional mention of him after that is known. Talk about a fall from grace. Do you think Constantine ever repented of his sins? Let us know in the comments. Innocent VIII. Pope Innocent VIII, the 213th guy to rock the papal hat, held the title of Pope for almost 8 years. During this time, war was rampant and paranoia surrounding witchcraft was at an all-time high. The Italian scene was like a boiling cauldron, and the Pope's political antics just cranked up the chaos. The mess he left behind took ages to clean up. Pope Innocent VIII wasn't so innocent. Some people even say that he's the poster child for unworthiness and immorality. His legacy is like a stain on the church's reputation. His shenanigans left the papacy in financial turmoil and with a bunch of sketchy practices that stuck around like gum on a shoe. Before becoming Pope, Innocent VIII was born in Genoa as Giovanni Battista Scibo. He came from an old Genoese family, or in other words, he came from money. His father was an influential senator in Rome, so Giovanni spent most of his youth at the Neapolitan court. He later became a canon at the Cathedral of Capua, but he left due to disagreements between him and the Archbishop of Genoa. He then went to Rome and Padua for his education. Giovanni started his journey with the church in Rome, working as a priest alongside Cardinal Calandrini. After about 20 years, he became the Bishop of Savona under Pope Paul II. However, that gig didn't last very long. In 1472 AD, he traded places and became the Bishop of Molfetta, letting him relocate to southeast Italy. The next year, he got a big promotion and became a cardinal thanks to Pope Sixtus IV, who he'd eventually take over for. This move was largely influenced by Giuliano della Rovere, who later became Pope Julius II. When Sixtus IV passed away in 1484, chaos erupted during the papal election. Gangs caused trouble in the streets, and inside the papacy, different groups were scheming left and right. The whole thing was like a messy political drama, with rumors of bribery and promises of fancy titles flying around. Shortly after Pope Innocent VIII took the papal throne in 1484, he initiated a crusade against the Turks. However, he faced a hurdle in rallying Christendom due to a conflict with King Ferdinand of Naples. As a result, the Pope excommunicated King Ferdinand and extended an invitation to King Charles VIII of France to seize the Kingdom of Naples. Due to this act of political defiance, Italy was thrown into anarchy for decades. Issues were created that wouldn't end until long after Innocent's death. On top of stirring up trouble with Naples, Innocent kicked off a bunch of fights that emptied the church's piggy bank. And to patch things up, he started selling off church jobs like hotcakes. Rumor has it that he dabbled in bribery, which didn't exactly help the papacy's image. Then there was the whole drama with witchcraft. Pope Innocent VIII wrote up a papal bull giving the green light to hunt down anyone suspected of being a witch. He teamed up with Heinrich Kramer, the German inquisitor, and gave Heinrich the power to go after people who practiced magic. But instead of stopping witchcraft, this bull was more like a political weapon, causing more trouble than it solved. Apparently, Innocent was also in favor of slavery. He allowed trade with Barbary merchants in which food would be traded for slaves. It's said that these slaves were acquired in order for them to be converted to Christianity. But who knows what he really used these slaves for? Innocent was given 100 Moorish slaves, whom he divided out between several of his favorite cardinals. Throughout his time as Pope, he fathered several illegitimate children. He was also the first in his position to acknowledge his kids. Before he confirmed their existence, they were simply referred to as the Pope's nephews. He ruled from the papal seat until July of 1492. By then, he'd grown extremely thin, and he could barely hold down his food. Apparently, the only nourishment he could stomach was a few drops of milk from a young woman's breast. Which, yeah, gross. He then fell ill with a fever and passed away on July 25th of that year. Gregory IX. Across the globe, there are two types of people, those who adore cats and those who despise them. While some may fall in between, most tend to lean strongly toward one side or the other. Throughout history, some individuals have taken this relationship between human and cats to extreme lengths. And surprisingly, one such figure was none other than Pope Gregory IX. That's right, this pope declared war on cats. You might be scratching your head wondering, why in the world would anyone wage war against cats? And frankly, you wouldn't be alone in your confusion. However, there's a rationale behind this seemingly absurd conflict that becomes clearer when we delve deeper into Gregory IX's story. He became the Pope in 1227 AD and held the title until his death in 1241. But before we jump into the cat war, let's rewind a bit as to better understand what started it. Conrad of Marburg was the papal inquisitor back when Pope Gregory IX was calling the shots. He had some wild beliefs about cats, believing they were basically Satan wrapped in fur. And guess what? With this insane belief, he got people to confess to all sorts of crazy stuff, like seeing giant toads and kissing mysterious pale men. And all the stories involved cats in one form or another. These confessions, forced out under torture, convinced Pope Gregory IX that cats were evil masterminds and needed to be dealt with. And that's how the whole cat war debacle got started. Back in the 13th century, Pope Gregory IX thought cats were walking vessels for the devil. People started to think black cats were bad luck, something that has lingered on today. From 1233 to 1234 AD, there was a huge cat massacre ordered by the church. If someone saw a cat, they were supposed to kill it. Oh, poor kitties. Some folks even thought this caused the plague because rats multiplied without their feline foes around. Turns out it was the fleas on the rats causing all the trouble. But the Pope's war on cats left a lasting impact, spreading superstition far and wide. The cat crusade caused more chaos than just kitty casualties. It triggered a witch-hunting frenzy. People went bonkers, accusing mainly women of witchcraft. And that's when a new job title emerged: witch hunter. These religious zealots went on a witch hunt spree, torturing and killing innocent women. But the hunt for witches didn't mean that cats were now safe. In fact, felines were thought to be the sidekicks of witches, so they were often murdered alongside their female counterparts. This idea that cats were evil carried on in Elizabethan England. Apparently, during the Queen's coronation, a cat effigy was burned, and it was stuffed full of live felines. Clement VII and the Western Schism. Robert of Geneva, who's also known as Antipope Clement VII, was caught up in a papal drama called the Western Schism. At the time, there were two people claiming the papal throne, and Clement was one of them. It was like the Roman Catholic Church was playing a game of who's the Pope. From between 1378 and 1417 AD, nobody could agree on who the real pope was. Each man fighting for the position had his own followers, his own administrative offices, and his own sacred college of cardinals. It was Clement VII and Urban VI of Bari duking it out for the ultimate prize. Due to political turmoil, the Roman Catholic papacy took up residence in France between 1309 and 1377. During this time, the church was known as the Avignon papacy. But in 1378, they returned to Rome and were pressed to elect a new pope by the Roman people, who wanted a Roman, or at least an Italian, to be elected to the position. Under these demands, it was Urban VI who was chosen, but Urban was extremely hostile towards his cardinals. It was those same cardinals who eventually left Rome again and returned to Avignon, France, where they elected their own pope. And that's where Clement VII came in. The cardinals claimed that the appointment of Urban VI was invalid because it was a decision made under fear. Clement resided in France, while Urban remained in Rome. This double election had horrendous effects on the church. Followers of the two popes were like rival teams in a sports match, rooting for their favorite player based on where they came from. This whole double pope situation turned into a huge drama, kicking off the political rivalries of the era. Both popes denounced the other and confused everyone in the process. The whole debacle seriously put a dent in the reputation of the papacy. But amidst the chaos, there were some bright minds who came up with ideas to patch things up, like officials from the University of Paris. They suggested that both popes should throw in the towel and renounce the title, or let a jury or council make the ultimate decision. But surprise, surprise, neither pope was up for it. Eventually, though, cardinals from both sides came together to solve the issue by forming the Council of Pisa. They met in 1409 and elected a third pope, Alexander V. Not sure why they thought electing another person to the position would solve the problem, but that's what they did. It's widely believed that Clement VII was responsible for initiating the Western Schism that tore the Church apart for nearly 40 years by claiming the title of Pope while in France. It wasn't until 1417 that things were finally mended when Pope Martin V was elected and the claims of the Avignon Pope were dismissed. Leo X. Pope Leo X gained fame for splurging like there's no tomorrow during his rule, turning into a big-time supporter of the arts and even footing the bill for the makeover of St. Peter's Basilica. But when the church started running out of money, Leo X came up with a crazy idea: selling indulgences. He even convinced people that they could buy their way into heaven. Leo became a monk at the young age of 7, and by 13 he was made a cardinal. He was then elected to the position of pope before he turned 40 in 1513. He had expensive tastes straight out of the womb. He was born into the prominent banking Medici family of Florence, who also happened to dabble in politics, so his rise to popedom isn't much of a surprise. He was all too happy to spend the church's money on his own lavish lifestyle. He purchased extravagant artwork and indulged in voluptuous entertainment, if you catch my drift. At the Lateran Palace, Leo was constantly surrounded by clever folks with questionable morals. The Pope favored wit far more than honesty. He and his buddies loved being amused, often putting on plays, shows, or ballets, whatever the Pope felt like at any given moment. Leo's predecessor, Pope Julius II, was frugal, leaving ample funds in the papal treasury, just for Leo to turn around and spend it all. It only took 8 years for the treasury to be drained. In 1517, as St. Peter's Basilica was under construction, the church ran out of money. So Leo came up with an evil plan to solve the problem. On March 15th, Leo declared that anyone who could contribute to the cathedral would be blessed with an indulgence. But this indulgence offered by the church was merely a forgiveness of punishments for sins. Leo also claimed that by investing in the church, souls could be released from purgatory. Basically, Leo said that he could return people to the state of purity that they possessed at the time of their baptism. Folks back then were extremely gullible, so as you can imagine, many people bought into this false promise. And taking it a step further was a preacher named Tetzel. He was tasked with preaching this idea of indulgences in Germany, but he went overboard when he began to claim that not only could the church absolve people's past sins, but it could also absolve people's future sins, or the sins they were harboring in their hearts. There were a few people who doubted this claim, however, including German priest, author, and theologian Martin Luther. As a result, Leo ended up being excommunicated from the church by Luther in 1521, and just 10 months later, he fell ill with pneumonia and passed away on December 1st of that year. Which pope/anti-pope do you think was the worst? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you liked this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one. Bye.